Okay, Victor, in the last part, we talked about horse racing and potentially moving back to England, but you ventured much further than that. Southeast and Far East Asia, where punters betted millions. Was that a bit of a hairy experience?
Yeah, I was and wasn't. I made some good friends there who I still speak to. Um, it all came about because of the 1994 World Cup? Was it World Cup? Yeah, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah, well, let's say it was. When we saw uh, well an influx of deposits to bet on football, with discerning punters from the Far East who wanted to place their bets on course and didn't want to pay tax. I mean, originally they started paying tax, and I got one huge punter from Hong Kong who I'd never met who sent an enormous deposit in. And then we had a case of a man turning up at the office who I vaguely knew, who turned up with £1 million in cash as a deposit for horse racing, and said he was going to Newbury that day to place the bets on that day's matches. And I'd left for the races to go to Newbury, and shortly after he departed, the office was raided by the Metropolitan Police. The money was confiscated. The man's car was stopped on its way to Newmarket on the motorway, and he was arrested. And I was none the wiser until I got to the races. Anyway, it turned out, well, I got a phone call in the car, but then, anyway, it turned out that the money was totally legitimate. It had been sent by a well-known Hong Kong businessman this was small bets for. And this prompted me, and I did a lot of business with Michael Tabor at the time, because the bets were enormous. It prompted me to go to the Far East and do some research. And I was introduced to a lot of people, potential punters, while I was out there, and realised that there was no future in this without having a jurisdiction where I could take bets without paying tax, because the punters certainly wouldn't pay tax. And then I learnt about the Asian handicaps and all the rest of it, and Tony Bloom came to work for me. And then we expanded the business, and it was, very exciting times, and it was everything was changing in the world, and it was changing for one reason and one reason only: technology. And that's what changed our business, is what changed the world eventually. But I think, as I've said very often, there are two businesses that have changed, or the world leaders in technology were the porn industry and the betting industry, because that was the way they could expand quickly. And it was exciting times that the world was changing quickly. And then, more recently, although it's not that recently now, the tablets and the smartphone have changed it again. And then it was, you could bet on you have to have a computer, a desktop. Now you can walk around with a phone and play roulette. It's extraordinary. But I think, as I said, that what changed the business and what made it what it was then is that we as a company adapted to technology fairly quickly.
Now you talk about the huge bets, and we're talking millions.
Yes.
I mean, even though you were a well-established and obviously resourced company, how many of those type of bets successful would you have stood for before you decided this is getting a bit?
Yeah, it wasn't one-sided, so we were seeing business on both sides. We saw customers that couldn't win, because once people would have betting on nearly every match that's televised, you're going to win in the end. There were some pretty worrying moments. Tony Bloom's got a wonderful attitude to gaming. You wouldn't know whether he's won or lost. And he likes to play big, and the bigger it is, the less emotion he shows. So it worked out. We were lucky, put it that way.
You mentioned Tony Bloom there. Is that right? You had a £3 million bet on his say-so, personally?
No, the company took a huge position on the Brazil-France match. And not only did Tony, because we had a sort of trade office where he was putting money on events, but also our customers were all back in Brazil. And he was absolutely right. And he was right most of the time. Otherwise he wouldn't be where he is now. I mean, he's a brilliant guy.
Okay, in your book, Put Your Life on It, you mention about a chap that introduced himself as the guy that turned the floodlights off. It didn't affect you financially, but it was sort of fixing matches basically, or at least contriving to end them when it was in a favourable position for the punter. Did you not think that when the level of business gets so high that anything is corruptible and it's a little bit, you might be in a tricky situation?
Yeah, I suppose the good thing is that they resorted to that because they couldn't get into the players. Now, the top leagues, although, I'm not saying it doesn't happen or didn't happen, and, it happened in tennis, cricket, that there were suspicious movements in markets. I mean, it's happened in racing. But the fact that they had to resort to turning lights off means their influence of players or teams wasn't. I mean, they weren't influencing teams or players. That lasted a very short time until the rules were changed. That the game had to finish. It was very daring, but it never happened again. Well, it happened twice, didn't it? So it was soon dealt with, which was great.
And was ultimately Asia a little bit too lively?
For the big players, it's still a big part of 365's business, Bet Pictures business. I mean, and a huge amount of big Asian betting houses. I mean, the Asian market is still probably the biggest in the world, even with America online.
Okay, now going back to domestic things, reading, so you mentioned the bookie and Jamie's book, there always seems to have been some sort of shady characters on the peripheries of the various Chandler bookmaking, whoever was around at the time. Is that right? And do you sort of enjoy flirtations with that element of society?
No, I don't. Listen, when you're at the race course, it's a great thing, I think, is that everyone's equal. Their money's the same. You hear stories about people, but if someone has a bet and they're honourable and they pay their account, I don't care whether, I don't want to know anything. The less you know, the better. I mean, the top of the tree, the bottom of the tree. There's an equality in betting. Who am I to judge?
Now, it's actually come a bit closer to home because you got arrested in France with your team.
Yeah.
You actually did a bit of time in the French.
I did no time at all, and I wasn't shut in a prison. We were interviewed. And we were asked to visit the police station. It was, we've been doing it for years and years. We didn't take cash. The bets were all phoned through to the office. The only cash changing hands the bets and I include some of the boys that worked for me and we were placing on the tote. But when we visited the police station the next day, it did ruin the day as far as from a social point of view, and the results weren't too good either. But we went to the police station and we were interviewed, but they were not kind enough that we didn't have to get there early. kind enough to get us a sandwich for lunch. And when the chief inspector arrived, and they thought we were dealing with French customers and people were coming in, and we'd almost there in convincing them that was because we showed all the dockets and the names and the account numbers and all the rest of it. We got a document from the office with all the bets that had been phoned through, and then the chief inspector arrived and said, "Why are we all wasting our time doing this? Because it will be legal here soon." And he walked me to the exit, and he spoke fluent English, although my French isn't bad, and said, "I just, I'm sorry this has all happened. It shouldn't." And I've had the feedback from the senior inspector that was there, and he said, you know, the fact that you weren't dealing with anyone French, although there was a French customer of mine there but he lived in Switzerland. So anyway, it was not nearly as bad as it was reported, or it wasn't really terribly worrying.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, as they say. But there was
yeah, we were worried. I thought, you know, and especially the chaps that worked for me were worried when we had the T-shirts printed with "Free the Longchamp Three" or 4 or whatever it was. It was great. But you know, you learn. And we weren't allowed to rent a box again at Longchamp. But we've been doing it for 15 years.
But there was the less sort of probably less fun incident with the Triads, or well, we think maybe they were Triads that visited your team.
Well, we had a big office there in Hong Kong. We had over 100 people in the office, and we had all marketing staff, and you know, we had promotions in bars and restaurants and things like that. There were beer mats with our telephone number all over Hong Kong, and lots of pretty girls, you know, recruiting customers. And the Traids obviously didn't like that because that we were treading on their toes, and the office was raided by some young men in T-shirts with tattoos, all well muscled, and Butch Brown, who was working for me today, thought they were window cleaners when they walked in, and told them to get out the office, and they said, "No, you get out the office and tell your..." And they thought I was his uncle. I'm not his uncle, but they said, "Tell your uncle that if he comes here, he's got a big problem," and they made all the staff leave the office, and there were certain other threats to him. We got him out of Hong Kong and booked him in about 6 hotels, and he went to one of them, and then we booked him on about 4 flights and got him to the airport and got him out, and then I flew over and met with the people in Macau, and we sorted things out.